My entitled wife disappeared after a girls' trip. Years later, she showed up at my doorstep with a baby, so I destroyed her life. My wife disappeared 4 years ago after a fake girls' trip to America. She never got on the plane with her friends. She just vanished. I used to be happily married to her for over 4 years before that. 4 years, and she threw it all away. We never had problems in our relationship until we found out I couldn't have kids. My count was extremely low. That news sent me into a depression I barely climbed out of. Over those 4 years of marriage, I tried to get her to agree to adoption, surrogacy, anything. But she denied every option, insisting she was fine without children. That was hard to believe because before we got married, she would sit for hours looking at baby clothes and nursery furniture online. After that doctor's appointment, she became completely numb to anything baby-related. She started making comments about my weight, my fitness, little jabs that she would deny when I confronted her. Her change bothered me at first because I thought she was forcing herself to accept our reality. But eventually I stopped noticing. Then came her trip. We lived in Brighton and she wanted to visit America with her girlfriends. I was supportive. I helped her pack and bought her new outfits. After dropping her at the airport, I stayed up 9 hours drinking coffee so I could call when she landed. The flight arrived, but she never picked up. I called her sister. Nothing. Then I called the friends who were supposed to be with her. They were 2 blocks from my house having tea at a cafe. My wife had truly abandoned me. I showed up drunk at her parents' house, accusing them of hiding her. My mother-in-law was kind. She let me cry on her shoulder for days. It took 2 years of therapy before I stopped having nightmares about her lost somewhere waiting for me to rescue her. But I didn't give up. I started going on golf trips again, going to pubs with my friends, joining the gym. I got promoted at work. My life was finally moving forward. Then, almost 4 years after she disappeared, I opened my front door and found my wife standing there with a baby in her arms. She looked exhausted, thinner than I remembered. The baby was maybe 6 months old. She smiled at me like no time had passed and said she was sorry, that she made a mistake, that she wanted to come home. I asked her whose baby that was. She said it was hers. I asked who the father was. She went quiet for a long moment, and then said it didn't matter because he was gone now and she needed help. She said she had nowhere else to go. I stood in my doorway looking at the woman who had destroyed me, and I felt absolutely nothing. I asked her where she had been for 4 years. She started crying and said she went to California with a man she had been seeing for almost a year before she left. I asked if that was why she rejected adoption and surrogacy. She didn't answer. I asked if she had planned to leave me the entire time she was pretending our marriage was fine. She just kept crying. Then she said the man left her when the baby was 2 months old and took all their money. She said her family wouldn't take her back because of the shame. She said I was the only person who ever truly loved her and that she knew I would help. I laughed. I actually laughed out loud on my doorstep. Because what she didn't know was that I had spent the last 3 years building a relationship with her mother. The woman had become like family to me. She came to my birthday dinners. She called me every Sunday. And 6 months ago, she told me something she had discovered. She found emails on an old laptop my wife left behind. Emails between my wife and the man she ran off with, sent 2 weeks before our wedding. My wife had never planned to stay with me. She married me because I was stable. Because I had money. Because I was her backup plan in case things didn't work out with him. Her mother was devastated. So was her father. And her sister. And every single person in her family who had spent 4 years believing she was a victim of something terrible. They all knew the truth now. Every single one of them. I looked at my wife and told her she should call her mother. She looked confused. She said her mother wasn't speaking to her. I said I know. Then I told her that her father had written her out of the will 3 months ago and given her entire inheritance to me as an apology for what his daughter did. Her face went white. She asked what I was talking about. I told her that the family she thought would eventually forgive her had already chosen their side. She started screaming at me, asking what I had done, asking what I told them. The baby started crying. And that's when my fiancé walked up behind me and asked if everything was okay. My fiancé touched my shoulder and I turned to look at her. She asked who was at the door. I told her it was nobody important anymore. My ex-wife heard that and her voice got louder. She started screaming about how I turned her family against her. She demanded to know what lies I told them. The baby in her arms started wailing. I stepped back and pushed the door closed. The lock clicked. Her fists pounded on the wood. The shouting continued for another minute before it started to fade. I walked into the living room and sat down on the sofa. My hands were shaking. My fiancé followed me and sat beside me. She put her hand on my knee and asked me to explain everything. I started from the beginning. I told her about the fake trip to America, about finding out my wife never got on the plane, about the 4 years of wondering what happened. Then I told her about the emails her mother found, about how my ex-wife had been planning to leave me since before we got married. My fiancé listened without interrupting. I watched her face for any sign that this was too much drama, any hint that she might walk away from all this mess. When I got to the part about the inheritance, she squeezed my knee. She said her ex-husband cheated on her 3 years ago. She said she understood exactly why I felt nothing for the woman outside. I heard footsteps on the pavement outside. Through the front window, I could see my ex-wife pacing back and forth on the sidewalk. She was still holding the baby. The child had stopped crying but looked uncomfortable. An hour passed, then another. My fiancé made tea and we sat watching television without really seeing it. Every few minutes, I would glance at the window. My ex-wife was still there. She sat down on the curb at one point. Then she stood up and walked to the door again. She didn't knock this time. She just stood there. My neighbor from 3 doors down came out of his house. He walked over to my ex-wife and they talked for a minute. She shook her head at whatever he said. He pulled out his phone. My ex-wife picked up the baby and walked quickly down the street. She got into a car I didn't recognize. The car drove away. My neighbor walked to my door and knocked. I opened it. He said he told her he would call the police if she didn't leave. He asked if I was all right. I thanked him and went back inside. There was a piece of paper sticking through the letterbox. I pulled it out. It had a hotel name and a room number written on it. The handwriting was my ex-wife's. She had written "please" at the bottom. I walked to the kitchen and dropped the paper in the bin. The phone rang early the next morning. My ex-mother-in-law was crying. She could barely get the words out. Her daughter showed up at their house during the night. She slept in her car in the driveway with the baby. The whole neighborhood saw it when they left for work. She asked if I was okay. She said she was sorry for what her daughter was doing. I told her I was fine. I told her not to apologize for things she didn't do. She said she loved me and hung up. My fiancé was still asleep. I made coffee and sat at the kitchen table. My phone buzzed with a text message. It was from my ex-sister-in-law. She said her sister had been calling her all night. The calls went back and forth between crying apologies and angry accusations. She blocked the number but wanted to warn me. My ex-wife was telling people I was keeping her from her family. I took a screenshot of the message. I saved it to a folder on my phone where I was keeping records of everything. 3 days went by without any contact. I started to think maybe she had given up. Then someone knocked on my door in the middle of the afternoon. I opened it expecting to see my ex-wife again. Instead, there was a woman in professional clothes holding a clipboard. She introduced herself as a social worker. She said she needed to ask me some questions about a woman who listed this address as her residence. I asked her to come inside. We sat in the living room and I explained the whole situation. I showed her the timeline on my phone. Photos from 4 years ago when my wife disappeared. Records showing I reported her missing. Therapy bills from the 2 years after. The social worker took notes. She asked if I knew where my ex-wife was actually staying. I gave her the hotel information from the note. The social worker looked concerned. She said something about the baby's welfare. She thanked me for my time and left. Derek came over that evening with takeaway food. We ate in the kitchen and he told me something that made my stomach turn. My ex-wife had contacted him on Facebook. She sent him a long message asking him to convince me to help her. She said I was being cruel and unreasonable. She said she knew Derek could make me see sense. Derek showed me his response. He told her exactly what he thought of people who abandon their spouses. He told her what those 4 years did to me. Then he blocked her. I thanked him, but the whole thing left me feeling sick. She was reaching into every part of my life, trying to find anyone who might take her side. Work got awkward the next day. A colleague pulled me aside in the break room. She said she saw a woman with a baby asking about me in the car park yesterday. The woman was showing people a photo on her phone. My colleague looked uncomfortable telling me this. An hour later, my boss called me into his office. He closed the door and asked if everything was all right. I had to explain the whole situation to keep rumors from spreading around the office. He listened and nodded. He said he was sorry I was dealing with this. He told me to let him know if she showed up again. Security would escort her off the property. I went back to my desk feeling exposed. Everyone probably knew now. Everyone was probably talking about it. My fiancé suggested we stay at her flat for a few days. She said we needed to get away from all the chaos. While we packed, she sat on the bed and admitted something that had been worrying her. She asked if this whole situation might change how I felt about having kids someday. She said that was part of what destroyed my first marriage. I stopped folding clothes and sat beside her. I told her my ex-wife's betrayal had nothing to do with my infertility. It had everything to do with her character. She was already planning to leave me before we even knew about my condition. The infertility was just her excuse. My fiancé nodded, but I could see she was still thinking about it. At her flat that night, we stayed up late talking. She told me about her ex-husband's affair, how she found out when a woman messaged her on Facebook with screenshots. How she almost didn't date again because the trust was so broken. She said she spent a year in therapy learning to believe people again. I told her about my nightmares during the first 2 years, about waking up thinking I needed to go find my wife, about the guilt I felt for being angry at someone who might have been hurt or lost. We talked about how we both rebuilt ourselves piece by piece, how we found each other when we were finally ready, how we weren't going to let my ex-wife's return damage what we built together. She fell asleep with her head on my chest. I lay awake for a while thinking about how different my life was now compared to 4 years ago. How much stronger I was. How much clearer I could see things. The next morning, my ex-father-in-law rang me while I was making breakfast. His voice sounded tight when he started talking. He told me his daughter had been posting all over social media for the past 2 days. She was writing long paragraphs about how her family abandoned her when she needed them most. She made herself sound like a victim of cruel parents who turned their backs on their daughter and grandchild. She left out every single detail about the affair, the planning, the emails before the wedding. She made it sound like she just made one mistake and everyone punished her for it. He said people were commenting on the posts telling him he should be ashamed. Neighbors were asking his wife why they wouldn't help their own daughter. He sounded furious but also tired. He told me his solicitor was drafting a cease and desist letter. They were going to demand she take the post down, or they would release the actual timeline of events. He apologized for his daughter dragging me back into this mess. I told him it wasn't his fault. After we hung up, I sat at the kitchen table staring at my toast. My fiancé came downstairs and asked what was wrong. I showed her my phone. My ex-wife had tagged me in one of the posts even though I had blocked her years ago. The post was still visible because someone had screenshotted it and sent it to me. She wrote about how I turned her family against her with lies, how I poisoned them because I couldn't forgive her for one mistake. I felt sick reading it. A week crawled by. I tried to focus on work, but my mind kept wandering. Then a thick envelope arrived in the post. It was from a legal aid office. I opened it standing in my hallway. The letter requested child support on behalf of my ex-wife. It claimed we were still legally married when the baby was conceived. That part was technically true even though we had been separated for years. The letter said I had a legal obligation to support the child. I read it 3 times trying to understand how this was even possible. I called my solicitor immediately. She listened to everything, and then told me this was a desperate move. She explained that my medical condition made it impossible for me to be the father. She said we would need to provide documentation, but this attempt wouldn't hold up in any court. She told me not to worry, but I was worried. I was angry. I kept thinking about how my ex-wife was trying every possible angle to trap me. First, she showed up at my door. Then she tried to use her family. Now she was using the legal system. My fiancé found me pacing in the living room that evening. She took the letter from my hands and read it. Then she hugged me and said we would get through this together. My therapy appointment was 2 days later. I walked into the office feeling wound up and tense. My therapist sat down across from me with her notebook. I told her everything about the legal aid letter, about how my ex-wife was trying to force me to support a child that wasn't mine, about how angry I felt that she thought this would work. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she asked me how this situation was different from 4 years ago. I thought about it. 4 years ago, I would have been devastated. I would have felt guilty. I would have wondered if maybe I should help anyway. Now I just felt angry that someone was trying to manipulate me. She nodded and said that was growth. She reminded me that healing isn't a straight line. Sometimes old wounds get poked and we feel things we thought we had processed. She said the important thing was that I knew my boundaries now. I knew what I would and wouldn't accept. I left the session feeling more centered. The anger was still there, but it felt manageable. I could handle this without falling apart. 3 days after that, my ex-sister-in-law texted asking if we could meet for coffee. I agreed, and we met at a small place near the seafront. She looked uncomfortable when she sat down. She ordered a tea and then told me something that made my stomach turn. Her sister had finally admitted the truth about the baby's father. He hadn't just left her. He was married the entire time. His wife found out about the affair when my ex-wife was 7 months pregnant. The wife confronted them both and the man chose his marriage. He cut off all contact with my ex-wife and threatened legal action if she tried to claim he was the father. My ex-wife had been the other woman in someone else's marriage. She had destroyed another family the same way she destroyed ours. The sister looked disgusted as she told me this. She said she couldn't believe her sister had learned nothing, that she had just moved from one bad decision to another. I sat there holding my coffee cup thinking about how my ex-wife expected me to sympathize with her. She expected me to help her after she had done to someone else exactly what she did to me. The poetic justice of it was almost funny. Almost. 2 weeks after the doorstep scene, I was at my desk at work when an email came through. It was from my ex-wife. I had no idea how she got my work address. The email was long and rambling. She wrote about how the man had promised to leave his wife for her, how he said they would build a life together in California. how he made her believe she was special. She wrote about feeling used and discarded, about being a victim of lies and false promises. She actually expected me to sympathize with her, to understand what it felt like to be betrayed by someone you trusted. I read the whole thing twice, then I forwarded it to my solicitor without typing a single word in response. I deleted the email from my inbox and blocked the address. My hands were shaking slightly, not from sadness or guilt, from pure irritation that she thought this would work, that she thought I would read about her being the other woman and somehow feel sorry for her. That evening, my fiancé and I sat in her flat talking about the engagement party. We had been planning it for months, but now she suggested we move the date up. She said we needed something positive to focus on, something that was about us and our future instead of my past. I agreed immediately. We spent the next 2 hours making lists and sending messages. We decided to invite my ex-in-laws because they were family to me now. We invited my best mate and our closest friends. Planning something joyful together made me feel lighter, like we were taking control of the narrative instead of letting my ex-wife's return define everything. My fiancé smiled more that evening than she had in days. We talked about flowers and food and music, normal things, happy things, things that had nothing to do with the chaos of the past few weeks. The social worker rang me the following Tuesday. She told me my ex-wife had been connected with emergency housing assistance. She was in a temporary flat with resources for single mothers. The baby was healthy, and my ex-wife was cooperating with all the support services. The social worker thanked me for my time and said she wouldn't need to contact me again unless something changed. I felt relieved hearing that the baby was looked after. I didn't want an innocent child to suffer because of adult decisions. But I felt absolutely nothing about my ex-wife's situation. No guilt, no concern, no sympathy. Just a vague sense of relief that she had somewhere to go and wouldn't be sleeping in her car with a baby. The social worker seemed satisfied with the outcome. She said the system was designed to help people in exactly this situation. I thanked her and hung up. My solicitor called me that same week. She told me she had sent a formal letter to my ex-wife's legal aid attorney. The letter included medical documentation proving I couldn't be the father due to my condition. It made clear that any further attempts to claim support would be considered harassment. My solicitor sounded confident when she said this should end the legal nonsense permanently. She told me to contact her immediately if my ex-wife or her attorney reached out again. I thanked her and felt another weight lift. The legal threat was handled. The baby was safe. My ex-wife had housing and support. There was nothing left for me to do. Nothing left for her to demand from me. 3 weeks after everything started, my ex-sister-in-law sent me another text. Her sister had accepted a place in a mother and baby housing program in London. She was moving away from Brighton, away from her family, away from me. The sister wrote that my ex-wife finally understood that no one here was going to rescue her from the consequences of her choices. She would have to build a new life somewhere else with the resources available to her. I read the message sitting in my car after work. London was far enough that I wouldn't accidentally run into her at the shops or on the street. She would be out of my daily life, out of my city. The relief I felt was immediate and physical. My shoulders relaxed and my jaw unclenched. She was leaving. It was really over. Sunday afternoon, my ex-mother-in-law rang and invited my fiancé and me to dinner. We drove to their house and spent a lovely few hours with people who had chosen to be my family even after the marriage ended. The house smelled like roast chicken and potatoes. We sat around the table talking and laughing. My ex-mother-in-law showed my fiancé old photos of me from years ago, photos from before everything fell apart. She talked about how proud she was of the man I had become, how I had handled everything with grace and strength. My fiancé fit right in with them. She laughed at their stories and helped clear the table after we ate. She stood at the sink washing dishes with my ex-mother-in-law while I sat with my ex-father-in-law in the living room. He told me again how sorry he was about his daughter, how he wished things had been different. I told him I was grateful for him and his wife, that they had helped me more than they knew. When we left that evening, my fiancé held my hand in the car. She said my ex-in-laws were wonderful people, that she understood now why I had stayed close to them. I drove home feeling content, feeling like I had real family who cared about me. People who had chosen me not because of marriage or obligation, but because they genuinely wanted me in their lives. 2 weeks after the dinner at my ex-in-law's house, my fiancé and I drove to a beautiful estate outside Brighton to look at wedding venues. The place sat on 20 acres of gardens with a stone manor house that had been hosting weddings for over 100 years. We walked through the main hall with tall windows and wooden beams across the ceiling. The events coordinator showed us photos of past ceremonies and talked about catering options and guest capacity. My fiancé squeezed my hand when we stepped out onto the terrace overlooking the gardens. She asked if I could picture us getting married here. I looked at her standing in the sunlight with her hair blowing in the breeze, and I realized I wasn't thinking about my ex-wife at all. Not about the doorstep confrontation, not about the baby, Not about any of the drama from the past month. I was just thinking about marrying this woman who actually wanted to be with me, who chose me every single day. We went back inside and signed the contract for next April. The coordinator congratulated us and shook our hands. Walking back to the car, I felt something lift off my shoulders. A weight I'd been carrying since my ex-wife showed up at my door. Maybe even longer than that. I felt lighter than I had in years. 2 months passed without any contact from my ex-wife. I went to work, played golf with Derek on Saturdays, had Sunday dinners with my ex-in-laws, planned wedding details with my fiancé. Life moved forward in a way that felt normal and good. Then one Tuesday afternoon, my phone buzzed with a text from my ex-sister-in-law. She wrote that her sister had settled into a flat in London and found part-time work at a shop. The baby was in childcare during her shifts. She was getting help from support services and seemed to be managing better with distance from everyone she'd hurt. The sister said she thought I'd want to know but understood if I didn't care. I read the message sitting at my desk at work. I waited for some kind of feeling to come. Anger, maybe. Or satisfaction that she was struggling. Or guilt that I hadn't helped her. But I felt nothing except a mild sense of relief that it was truly over. She was gone from Brighton. Gone from my daily life. Building whatever new existence she could manage in London. I texted back a simple thank you for the update and put my phone away. The chapter was closed. Saturday morning, I woke up early and made coffee. My fiancé was still asleep, so I took my mug out to the garden and sat in one of the chairs with the newspaper. The sun was just coming up and the air was cool and fresh. I read through the sports section and drank my coffee and listened to the birds. After a while, my fiancé came outside in her pajamas and sat next to me. She kissed my cheek and stole a sip of my coffee. We sat there together, not saying much, just being comfortable and quiet. Then it hit me that I hadn't thought about my ex-wife in 3 full days. Not once. 4 years ago, I'd been drunk and broken on her parents' doorstep, accusing them of hiding her. Crying on my ex-mother-in-law's shoulder because I thought my wife was lost somewhere waiting for me to rescue her. And now I was sitting in my garden planning a wedding to someone who loved me honestly. Someone who showed up every day and meant what she said. The journey from that doorstep to this garden chair had been brutal. 2 years of therapy. Nights when I couldn't sleep. Days when getting out of bed felt impossible. But I'd done it. I'd rebuilt myself into someone I actually liked. Someone who was happy. 3 weeks later, we threw our engagement party at a restaurant in town. We'd invited about 40 people, including my ex-in-laws, Derek and his wife, my work friends, my fiancé's family, and her close friends. Everyone showed up dressed nice and in good spirits. The restaurant had set up a private room for us with tables arranged in a big circle. There was food and wine and a small cake. People mingled and talked and laughed. My ex-mother-in-law hugged me when she arrived and told me how handsome I looked. Derek made jokes about me finally getting my life together. My fiancé's parents welcomed everyone and said how happy they were that their daughter had found someone good. When it was time for toasts, I stood up with my glass. I looked around the room at all these people who had stood by me when everything fell apart, who had helped me climb out of the hole I'd been in. I said something about second chances and the people who stay with you when life gets hard. About how grateful I was for every person in this room. My ex-mother-in-law started crying and came over to hug me again. Derek raised his glass and shouted something about me finally getting my act together. Everyone laughed. Then my fiancé stood up and kissed me in front of everyone. The room erupted in cheers and applause. I looked around at all these faces smiling at us, at the life I'd rebuilt from nothing, full of people who actually cared about me, who wanted to be here celebrating with us. I'd never felt more content or sure about my future. This was exactly what I'd worked for, what I'd earned by refusing to stay broken.